Grazie.
Frank Keurhors, ambassador from the Netherlands to Malta. This is my country I represent here. The question is, what can Malta learn from adaptation measures in the Netherlands? It's a difficult question, because the Netherlands is completely different from Malta. Malta is about the size of that first island you see over there. It's called Texel. And we're quite densely populated. We've got about 17.5 million people. And they're densely populated in urbanized areas. And the rest is agricultural area. We were the second agriculture exporter in the world. And that puts a lot of stress on the soil we have, on the land. And that's giving my government now major headaches, because we've reached all the levels that the EU has put on us on nitrogen and what have you. But this is the Netherlands, and another interesting feature is that about 60% of the Netherlands is under sea level. And, oh, I've unvolunteered, yes. Am I actually doing this, or is it you doing that? Okay, because I wasn't aware I was pressing anything. 60% under sea level. So that means that we have specialized in adaptation. Adaptation, first of all, through the centuries on water management. We've done the threat of the sea rise levels combined with storms, rivers overflowing in the Netherlands meant that we had to do something. And now we can go to the next slide, yes. So behind those gentlemen in the black and white is a major disaster we had in 1953, which really was a wake-up call for the Netherlands and its inhabitants. We have to do something. It's the sea went into the land after a big storm. This is actually an annual recurring feature in the Netherlands, floodings due to rivers that are overflowing, coming from Germany and France and what have you, seeking its way to the sea through the Netherlands. We have, as an example, we have a massive program called the Delta program. Yes, the Delta program started with building these big, what's the word in English? Yes, to keep the sea out and yes. It also takes care of freshwater supply, spatial adaptation. Basically, it's a plan to redesign the Netherlands in order to be able to cope with climate change. And we really have to cooperate there. Under the Delta program, it's the national governments, the provinces, it's the local authorities, all work hand in hand on priorities. Under the adaptation priorities, warmer, wetter, drier, and rising sea levels. These are the four phenomena we have to deal with. And we've been doing that, like I said, for centuries, which means that also consensus building is in our national DNA. All our political decision making is done by consensus, and we love to discuss it until we drop. But there's a reason for it, because in history we were faced with disasters. And when you're faced as a country with disasters from abroad, you don't argue amongst each other. You make up your mind, you get going. So I think what I call that an intrinsic social and political adaptation measure. And that's also the same approach we have now to climate change. So all these different layers of government and also private organizations work hand in hand to cope with it. And we've got hundreds. I had to prepare this talk. I had hundreds and hundreds of examples going on about little initiatives to big initiatives to deal with climate change. One of them I found here is the, oh yeah, this is another one about flooding rivers. So, of course, you don't want to obstruct the infrastructure, so what we did there is build a nice bridge for cyclists and pedestrians. And this is just for the river to flow whenever we've got lots of water flowing through the Netherlands. This is actually the one I want to show. It's called Sand Motor. And why did it struck me? It's because, I don't know, I had to stay, when I came here, I had to stay in a hotel near Malta Bay, and I saw that there were similar attempts to put sand up in Malta Bay to make a beach and all that, and then it got washed away. This program is aimed at the preservation of our coastline. and protection against flooding. And of course, as you can see, it's also an enormous beach. And apart from that, it's also good for biodiversity. Now, how did this, if we can go to the next slide, just a bit of the technical side on it. So this is how it works. Sand is dredged and dumped there. The amount of sand they use there is the equivalent of 20 years of sand upbringing, as we call sand nourishment, for 20 years. Then you just let nature and the natural forces do its work. You know, the waves, the wind, move the sand. And at the end, behind the panel, you can see that you got the beach and the dunes that was shown in the previous picture. The whole thing cost about 70 million euros. And we evaluated it. It started about 10 years ago. We evaluated it, and it's really value for money in terms of the ones I just said, in terms of coastal security, natural habitat restoration, tourism and all that. Well, tourism, leisure activities, of course. The next one, oh yeah, this is also another one where you bring up the sand and you can create this almost Caribbean style of peninsulas. The next one is, of course, that as we've been dealing with water for centuries and centuries, our infrastructure was mostly developed to get rid of water as soon as possible, because there was so much of it, and just went to the sea. But this is counterproductive in longer periods of drought, and that's what we're experiencing now, more drought. So one way of reversing this is to use cultural heritage as an asset for climate adaptation. It's not a spectacular or massive thing, but it's what we do in some old towns. And one example I want to give you here, because if you're flying to the Netherlands, you go landing in Schiphol, you most probably will see this from the air. So what is it? It's an example of the active utilization of heritage in climate adaptation. It's the Amsterdam wetlands. The oldest known maps of the area show that there were already, for a long, long time, human interventions to control the water in the area. An important trigger to make this into a wetland was that we're experiencing great loss of biodiversity. The rural landscape was disappearing. And the problem there is the land subsidence. So the land goes lower, the sea rises. So what they did is they created a robust natural area. It's 12,000 hectares of interconnected polders and marshlands that by restoring the peatlands. And it's also now a nice location for tourists and recreational use. One other example, next one. One other example, you probably all followed the news earlier this month when King Willem-Alexander opened the Global Center on Adaptation in Rotterdam. It's a building, this building is a green architectural revolution in which climate adaptation takes the center stage. I'll explain a little bit what this is about. It's completely self-sufficient. It's built entirely from fast-growing wood from Europe instead of concrete, which is a very harmful substance in terms of extraction from raw material, but also it accounts up to 8% of the world's CO2 emissions. So this one was made of wood, fast-growing European wood. The building is floating base is 90 by 24 meters. This is quite large, and it was prefabricated in 3 different locations in the Netherlands. Here you see it when it's finally assembled. The base is made of recycled concrete. It's reusable, and funny enough, it contains a heat exchange system. Now, I'm not a technician, but that's basically what we have in our housings in the Netherlands, floor heating. And it's a simple system here that's been applied that uses heat pumps to take energy from the water of the River Maas, and is used to heat or cool the building. Now, there are solar panels on the roof on one side, and on the other side is what we call a green roof. Now, green roofs are getting more and more important because they are energy efficient, they store energy, they store rainwater, and they reduce noise. So the rainwater runoff is also filtered and reused. So there's electricity and water from the roof and an energy source at the bottom. So that makes the building work. And the new building will get the highest certification for sustainable building in the world. And this is how it looks when it's ready and in use. So it's not a bad place to work. It's an international organization there. Another thing we're developing are the seaweed in algae farms. I've chosen all these examples because there is a sort of link to Malta. And algae grow fast, and in the case of spirulina, they're also rich in protein. And that makes it a very interesting product to grow. And in the Netherlands, there's at the moment a lot of research going into microalgae. So how do you do that on a large scale? In a greenhouse. This is how we do it with different designs of photobioreactors with lighting. So it's a real high-tech greenhouse horticulture. And it's in settings that are being totally controlled, like how you grow tomatoes. So you know how to get the best quality and the most pure product. And fortunately, spirulina is allowed on the EU market, unlike the other algae, but it's still not allowed. On seaweed, the next one, I had a nice video, but well, it's not working at the moment. But basically, it was a video on a farmer's couple who started a seaweed farm, and really, in a few years, had amazing results. And it's about the application of seaweed as fertilizer, as food, as what have you, and also about low cost in making it, and it's not extractive. On the contrary, most products we use are made from resources that are extracted, so we take it, we give nothing back to the earth. Seaweed is a product that gives everything back. It increases CO2, it cleans the pollution from the water, etc. But that will be for another time. Another example I have is, of course, embracing cycling. I know Michel is going to tell you something later about cycling, but I just have to say something about it because I wouldn't be credible if I would not touch this subject. It's in our DNA as well. I mean, we all take the bicycle. The Prime Minister goes to work on his bicycle. But it wasn't always like this. In the 70s, there were huge protests against the idea of that guy, Prime Minister Joop den Uyl, to turn the Netherlands into a car, how we say that, cars, the wave of the future, so to say. We were a car-oriented country, like Malta is today. And cars killed on average 2 persons a week, including children, in the city of Amsterdam alone. So people took the streets over there, didn't want it anymore. Also, we had an oil crisis, a Saudi oil boycott. The gas prices were rising. People were fed up of demolishing whole neighborhoods to make highways. So all these factors together contributed to a government that had to decide to develop a cycling infrastructure. So now, this is an accident of history, so to say, but it's not something that cannot be embraced anywhere else. So now we have 37,000 kilometers of fully segregated bike lanes and 17.6 billion kilometers on the bike every year. So we're the most successful cycling nation in the world. And this can be replicated anywhere else in the world. Of course, we have certain advantages, because we're as flat as a pancake in the Netherlands. But on the other hand, we have a lot of wind, we have a lot of rain. It's cold. Malta doesn't have all these things. It's quite more conducive to it. And with the rise of e-bikes and cargo bikes, I think there's no more excuse for prioritizing cars everywhere. Just on a separate note, we'll be organizing the Oris Bike Day again on the 24th of October with Rota. And the registration will open soon, but that's just... A few tips on how to promote cycling, and then I'll go to my final subject. Separate cars from bikes. This is an example we did in Eindhoven, which is the rotonde, the roundabout is lifted up, so the car highways are not interrupted and cyclists can go their different ways. This is quite an innovative thing. But you have to separate the bicycles from the cars and vice versa, because the main reason why people don't cycle is that they don't feel safe. Next one. This is a network of the cycling infrastructure of the Netherlands, a bit of Germany and Flanders and Belgium. I just did one because you can't really make any sense of it. It just gives you an impression of the density of the cycling network that you have. And so you don't build what I see here on Malta because I use my bicycle to work every day. You see small pieces of bike lane from nothing to nowhere. I mean, they're not being followed up. Suddenly you hit a pavement or a pothole or whatever, and then it's done. Another one is you have to embrace the streets where bikes come first. So if you've been to the Netherlands, you will remark that a lot of roads have this sort of pinkish color. These are the bicycle roads. These are the roads that bikes have priority. Cars don't have priority there. You can drive 30 kilometers maximum. It might seem slow, but standing in traffic jams is even slower. And you have to separate them from the cars. What we also do is most towns and cities are discouraging, that's the next one, discouraging cars from going into the city center. One way of doing is to make parking fees, to make big parkings. Another thing is, this is in the gemeente Utrecht, the city of Utrecht, where they have the biggest bike storing facility in the world. 12,500 bicycles can be put there. So if you go by train or commuting or you want to park your car, you can take a bicycle and they're for rent as well. So basically, an advice to the politicians here, if you're going to do this, communicate the benefits clearly. It took, in the Netherlands, political courage to change from cars to bicycles. But the gains are tremendous. It's tranquility, fewer emissions, major health benefits, traffic safety, and less space occupied by vehicles. Now, more on a personal note, although there are quite a lot of universities at the moment that are going to sharing what I'm going to say now, this is a picture from our planet taken from the moon. It's a bit of moon down. So I've given you a few examples of how we're trying to adapt. And there are hundreds of, like I said, climate adaptation projects currently being carried out in the Netherlands alone. However, the sad reality is that science clearly states that the most advanced adaptation ideas and techniques will not stop the current climate breakdown, nor will it guarantee the ecological disaster that we are creating. So if ecology teaches us one thing, it's interconnectedness. And we have been brought up and taught, and our thinking is based on separation. We think in individual parts rather than in complex wholes. And that's why we are in the situation as we are today. It's the same reductive thinking that we are doing with every subject and problem that we encounter that leads to the situation we're in. The question is, of course, even if we succeed in 100% clean energy, and we develop the best green technology, and we make the very most of climate adaptation. The question, of course, then is, what are we going to do with it? And the most likely answer to that question, probably in our heads right now, is that we'll keep on doing exactly the same as what we've been doing so far in our lives. So we'll continue extraction, we'll continue production at an ever-increasing rate, we're placing ever-increasing pressures on the living world, maximizing profits. That's what we do. So clean energy, for instance, it might help deal with reducing emissions or getting rid of emissions alone, but it does nothing to reverse deforestation, overfishing, soil depletion, mass extinction, to name a few. So the real adaptation, and that's the point I want to make, is we have to face is that we adapt our needs to what our Earth can sustain. Now, research over the last year showed that on average, about 70% of the people in middle and high-income countries realize that overconsumption is putting our planet and societies at risk, and that we should buy and own less, and doing so would not compromise our happiness or our well-being. And the research also shows that the younger generation is more aware of this than the older generation. And renowned academics of today, like Giorgio Callis, Jason Hickel, Kate Raworth, have all been working on new economic principles and new ways to see the world. And it will take courage and discipline of us all to overcome all those assumptions that we have in our head and that have shaped our current culture and politics. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm very honored to be here and to share these thoughts with you. Thank you very much.